Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Our lead story tonight is a story of humiliation. Pakistan has failed to secure an IMF bailout. A team from the International Monetary Fund spent 10 days in Islamabad. Negotiations went into the 11th hour, but the IMF was not satisfied. The Pakistani finance minister was promising good news last evening. He had to cancel his press conference. The bailout talks failed. The IMF does not trust Pakistan. It is making tough demands. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has called them beyond imagination, the demands. But Pakistan will have to swallow the bitter pill. Tonight we'll tell you how this country was humiliated before the IMF. Also, what role is China playing in this crisis? There is no Chinese bailout for Pakistan, not even debt relief. Beijing is cutting its losses. We'll tell you how. First, the headlines. Ukraine claims Russia has launched massive missile and drone attacks. The Ukrainian army chief says 2 Russian missiles crossed into Romania and Moldova. Romania has denied the claims. Chinese battery plant in Hungary faces a backlash. Locals in Debrecen say the facility poses a risk to the environment. American lawmakers want to bring a new law to promote dialogue between China and the Dalai Lama. If passed, this legislation could jumpstart negotiations between Beijing and the Dalai Lama's representatives. America also plans to make it easier for Indians to get an H-1B visa. A pilot project will be launched later this year to resume domestic visa revalidation. The UK has avoided recession after flatlining in the last 3 months of 2022, but its Finance Minister Jeremy Hunt warns the country is not out of the woods yet. And the Taliban has banned the sale of contraceptives to women in Kabul and Balkh provinces. Pakistan is not getting a bailout, at least not yet. The country is on the brink of bankruptcy. The only way to avoid it is to get money from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. It's the lender of the last resort. But for the moment, it is not lending any money to Pakistan. The bailout talks have failed. These talks had been on for 10 days. For 10 days, an IMF team was in Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. Today, they've left without handing Pakistan the bailout they need. How much money did they want? Pakistan wants $1.1 billion from the IMF, and they need this money immediately. Pakistan, by the way, was already on a bailout program. Islamabad wants to revive an old $6.5 billion package, but it has failed to reach a deal with the IMF. What happened? The negotiations are stalled. But the story is not about that. It's about the humiliation of Pakistan. It's about a country's political leadership being brought to its knees. Pakistan is begging the IMF for funds, but the lender refuses to budge. Why? Because it does not trust Pakistan anymore. So the IMF has put some very tough conditions for giving a bailout. I'll tell you about the conditions, but first, just to give you a sense of how serious Pakistan's predicament is, let me quote what their Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said last week. Our economic challenge is unimaginable. The conditions we will have to agree to with the IMF are beyond imagination. But we will have to agree with the conditions. So what are these conditions? Let's bring you the inside story. Why can't Pakistan get the bailout it needs? Fundamentally, this is about trust. The IMF does not trust Pakistan. And who can blame them? This is Pakistan's bailout number 23. This country is the most frequent and by all accounts the worst borrower. Pakistan has sought more bailouts than any other country in the world. That should tell you something. Think of the situation like approaching a bank. If you have a steady income, if you pay your EMIs on time and have a good record, you'll easily get the loan that you want. But what happens when you have a poor credit history? When your records show that you're a serial defaulter, what happens then? When you have a large pile of debt, plus you don't have the money to repay it, the bank will not go easy on you. It will ask you to put up more collateral, or worse, it will not give you any loans at all. That's the juncture at which Pakistan is. It is on the brink of a sovereign default. The IMF is not sure about giving Pakistan a loan, so it's making tough demands. What kind of demands? I have a list. Increase electricity and gas rates and firm commitments from bilateral partners. Here the IMF is talking about countries which have lent money to Pakistan, the bilateral partners, countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, China. What kind of assurances does the International Monetary Fund need? Broadly, two things. First, easier terms on existing loans, and second, more loans. Because borrowing from the IMF is not going to be enough. Pakistan will not be able to meet its expenses just with the money that it gets from the International Monetary Fund. So it needs to borrow more. It must figure out where the rest of the money will come from. Here's how that would work out. That could work out. Reports say Saudi Arabia could step up. As of May 2022, Saudi Arabia had given Pakistan $4.2 billion in assistance, $4.2 billion. Riyadh could now give an additional loan of $2 billion. It is said to be looking into the possibility. The UAE gave a $2 billion loan earlier. Now it would give another $1 billion, or so the reports say. Pakistan has also made an appeal to China. It has made two requests, an additional loan of $1.5 billion and the rollover of existing debt. Will China come through, though? We'll get to that in a bit. For the moment, I'm going to go back to that IMF review. The lender does not have a great impression of Pakistan, and I'm not the one saying this, the Pakistani press is. Look at some of their reportage. This is the Express Tribune, and I'm quoting, "Due to a credibility crisis, the IMF was not willing to blindly trust Pakistan this time and has set many prior conditions." Next, we have the Dawn, and this is what they say. The fund, which is the IMF, was, however, still not confident about external financing commitments, particularly from the friendly countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE and China, besides some other multilateral funding. Just look at the choice of words in the Pakistani press. Credibility of crisis, lack of confidence. We're talking about a sovereign country here. Lending money to a government is supposed to be the most secure investment or among the best. But that's clearly not the case with Pakistan. The writing is on the wall for Pakistan. It is caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. Their only hope? The bailout deal is not dead. The IMF says some progress has been made, but Islamabad needs to do more. Listen to what the International Monetary Fund has said, and I'm quoting again, "The timely and decisive implementation of these policies along with resolute financial support from official partners are critical for Pakistan." So Pakistan needs to first implement the demands, then come back to the IMF. Another meeting is scheduled for Monday.
I am confirming that we have got the Memorandum of Financial and Economic Policies at 9 a.m. this morning as per their commitment. We will completely go through it over the weekend and we will have virtual meeting with them on Monday. God willing, we will try to complete the IMF program for the second time in Pakistan's history with the same spirit. We have completed this process, keeping in view the sovereign commitment.
Pakistan must show progress to get this bailout. But before that, they have to deal with an even more urgent problem: China. China is proving to be a nightmare for Pakistan. It is Pakistan's biggest bilateral creditor. Pakistan owes China $30 billion. You could say China accounts for a big part of the debt that Pakistan is buried under. But Islamabad now wants the debt to be rolled over. Will Beijing play ball? Highly unlikely. They're yet to commit to the debt restructuring, and without that, Pakistan won't be able to sustain. So why isn't China doing it? Why is China delaying debt relief to Pakistan? It seems Beijing is cutting its losses. Do you remember the blackouts from last month? A power outage affected the entire country, all of Pakistan. Almost 220 million people. They were without electricity. Do you know why that happened? Why did Pakistan have to suffer this blackout? Because its national grid went down. And this wasn't a new problem. Pakistan has been suffering power outages for over a year now. Turns out, China has a role to play there. I'll repeat that. There's a Chinese hand in Pakistan's blackouts. You may have heard of CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. These are basically Chinese projects in Pakistan. And this is an important component of the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, the CPEC has many projects. Among them are power projects. Under CPEC, multiple Chinese companies had set up plants in Pakistan, power plants. Many of them have shut down. So Pakistan's existing facilities are overburdened. They're struggling to keep up with the demand. How many plants were shut down? Well, we don't have the exact number, but as of November last year, 20 plants were shut. Why did the Chinese power companies leave? Because Pakistan refuses to pay them. Chinese companies are owed $1.5 billion. Pakistan hasn't been able to settle these dues. No bills, no power. That's how it's working. So much for being iron brothers. The debt is rusting the iron. China seems to have put projects in Pakistan on the back burner. I have some numbers from last year. In 2022, China's investment in CPEC fell. Funding was cut by 56%. And this is not a one-off case. This is a trend. Chinese investments in Pakistan have been steadily falling. Let's look at some more data. In 2020, Pakistan got almost $155 million from China, $155 million. In 2021, the investment fell to around $77 million, a drop of almost 50%. So why is China putting less money into Pakistan? Because CPEC projects have failed to take off. In 2021, the Chinese ambassador began to complain. The chair of a parliamentary committee revealed his grievances. Listen to what was said. The Chinese ambassador has complained to me that you have destroyed CPEC and that no work was done in the past 3 years. You have destroyed CPEC. That's what he said. Today, China faces an economic crisis of its own. The Wuhan virus has broken the back of the Chinese economy, and Beijing is reluctant to give out any debt relief. Take the case of Sri Lanka. China is yet to sign on Sri Lanka's IMF bailout. Last year, the world's poorest countries faced debt payments worth $35 billion. More than 40% of this was owed to China, 40% of this debt. Again, Beijing dragged its heels. The West has come down hard on China. It says China, and I'm quoting, China is the main obstacle to moving ahead with debt restructuring agreements. Pakistan too is beginning to complain, or at least see the problem. It wants to reduce Chinese debt. Pakistan wants China to reconsider a railway project, the Karachi-Peshawar railway line. It was supposed to be upgraded. The agreement was reached in November last year, but Pakistan can no longer afford the project. It wants China to give a 40% discount on the bill. The value of the project was almost $10 billion. A 40% discount would mean a discount of $4 billion. Will Beijing agree to this? Well, Pakistan is yet to make a formal request. It can see that Chinese debt is killing its economy. And China can see that money invested in Pakistan is money lost. We sympathize with neither. We say they deserve each other. Our next story is about India's National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval. He's been on the move. He's had a busy last few weeks. His first stop was the United States, then the United Kingdom. Yesterday, he met Vladimir Putin in Russia. What's going on? Let's try to connect the dots. On first impressions, each engagement had its own agenda and purpose. But there are a few common themes. One of them is India's G20 presidency. New Delhi will host the G20 summit in September. So there is scope to build synergies. Reason number two, the global events. The war in Ukraine, it's escalating. There is a debt crisis in India's immediate neighborhood. It may give rise to new threats. Reason number three is India's own security issues. The challenge from China, the situation in Afghanistan, and Pakistan's continued protection of terrorists. To manage these challenges, India needs the support of its partners. And that is the backdrop of Doval's high-profile visits. Now let's tell you about them one by one. Ajit Doval's first stop was the United States. This happened last week. He met with his American counterpart, Jake Sullivan. In Washington, the focus was on the Indo-Pacific, the sharing of critical technologies, defense manufacturing in India, and expanding the role of the Quad. All of this was discussed. The result was the launch of new and ambitious initiatives. Both sides are taking steps to counter China, India and the US. Consider what Jake Sullivan said after meeting Ajit Doval. He referred to the Galwan Valley and the clashes between Indian and Chinese troops in 2020. This is what Jake Sullivan said. The Indians don't advertise this, but it had a kind of 9/11 Pearl Harbor style impact on the strategic thinking of their elites. That's what Sullivan said. There were similar takeaways from London too. Ajit Doval met his British counterpart, Tim Barrow, and in a surprise move, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak joined in as well. In the UK, the focus was on the pro-Khalistan groups in the country, in the UK, and the stalemate over the extradition of economic fugitives like Nirav Modi and Vijay Mallya. India is unhappy on both fronts. New Delhi wants London to do more. Doval's third and final stop was Russia. The world's attention is on the conflict in Ukraine, but in Moscow, Doval reminded the world about Afghanistan and the threat of terrorism from Pakistan. India's National Security Advisor attended a regional dialogue on Afghanistan. He also met with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Doval said that India would never abandon the people of Afghanistan. He referred to the growing terror threat and the expanding presence of groups like ISIS, Lashkar-e-Toiba, and Jaish-e-Mohammed. President Putin seemed to agree with him. Here is what he said, and I'm quoting, "International terrorist organizations are stepping up their activities, including Al-Qaeda, which is building up its potential. We are also worried about attempts to use the situation in Afghanistan to allow extra-regional forces to expand or build their infrastructure." Guess who skipped this meeting? Pakistan. Islamabad did not send a representative for this. Moscow sent an invite to Islamabad. They chose to not turn up. What is their explanation? I have a copy of the statement. This is from Pakistan's Foreign Ministry, and this is what it said. "Our decision not to participate in the instant meeting was made in light of our consideration that Pakistan can make a better contribution," listen to this, "a better contribution in formats and forums which can contribute constructively to peace in Afghanistan." It seems like Pakistan wanted to avoid any humiliation. Just look at the list of the invitees: China, Iran, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, and of course India. All key regional stakeholders were in attendance. How is this not the right forum? Perhaps the economic crisis has blindsided Pakistan. What about India? Ajit Doval's high-profile visits show India's stature in global affairs and show that the stature is rising. India's multi-alignment policy is proving to be successful, and New Delhi seems ready to reap its rewards. Meanwhile, more details of Chinese spy balloons are spooking the world. The latest report says some of these balloons are capable of firing hypersonic weapons. What is the world doing in response? Building alliances, closing ranks. Case in point, Japan and the Philippines. The president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., is in Tokyo. It's his first visit since he took office last year. The purpose? To strengthen economic and, more importantly, defense ties with Japan. Tonight, we'll discuss why this could be a game changer. Also, the US, the UK, and Australia are conducting drills. Our next report puts together all the efforts being made to contain the dragon. The Philippines and Japan have signed an agreement, ostensibly on disaster relief. But it involves their armed forces, how they will work together during disaster relief operations. Sounds harmless enough, but it's being seen as the beginning of closer military ties between the two American partners. Japan and the Philippines have been America's partners. Now they are looking to work together. The US wants its allies in Asia battle ready. Why? To counter any potential threat from China. Washington sees Beijing as the single greatest threat in the world right now, and it believes an aggressive China needs to be reined in. China has been ramping up the rhetoric around Taiwan. It hasn't ruled out taking Taiwan by force. It conducts regular live-fire drills and territorial incursions. The The US believes China could invade Taiwan by 2027. Then there's the rest of the neighborhood. China has constant disputes over islands all around the mainland. The Philippines is among them. It has a new leader, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. He's working to repair ties with America. Last week, he signed a deal with the Americans, granting the US greater access to military bases in the Philippines. They plan to hold about 500 joint combat exercises this year. A US general was in the Philippines this week to prepare for the drills.
I'm personally very buoyed by what I see by our allies and partners in this region and the way we've come together in response to aggression by the PRC and by North Korea to say we will not let that stand. Countries like Japan and Australia, two other great allies in this region for us, have shown that they will band together, that they will not stand for aggression from these nations that have decided they want to change the world order out here.
Changing the world order in Asia would be tough, but the US is making headway. Let's look at its relationship with Australia. They're partners in the Quad with India and Japan. They're also part of the AUKUS grouping along with the UK. In fact, as the American general was in Manila and Marcos Jr. was in Tokyo, the AUKUS partners were conducting a joint drill in the US. And they weren't shy about saying what they were preparing for.
So for this event, we are training in accordance with the National Defense Strategy Pacing Challenge. And in that case, for this exercise, it is the Chinese threat. We're not necessarily reacting to any recent political events. It's just the pacing challenge that we train to so that we're ready for whether it be an Indo-PACOM threat or a EUCOM threat or a CENTCOM threat. We think that if we're ready for China, we're ready for anybody.
The exercises were to simulate dealing with the Pacific Ocean. The US, the UK, and Australia would have to cross vast distances to get to China. They want to improve the interoperability of their air forces. One part of the simulation also focused on what they would do in case an area was invaded. No specific scenario was named, but that should be obvious. So the US is preparing to deal with China. It is roping in its Asian allies. The goal seems to be setting up a string of interoperable sites all around China. A string that could turn into a noose if an aggressive dragon chooses to rear its head.
Sana feda güneşim. Neresine güneşim?
يلا تطلع معك حدا غيرك.
يا طيب طيب حاول تقطع الساقه في فرج لا الثاني
"20,000 dead and counting. Turkiye's tragedy grows by the day, and the hope of finding survivors is dimming. India is playing a big role in the rescue and relief operations. The crisis has brought to light the need for countries to have good friends, not bankrupt friends, always on the lookout for bailouts themselves, but solid friends who have your back in the toughest of times. Now here's the thing. India has not really been a friend of Turkey. Ties between the two deteriorated in recent years, but India did not waste any time in stepping up to help. India took a conscious decision to not let tensions with Turkey's leadership stop it from helping its people. India is calling it Operation Dost. The word Dost means friend, both in India and in Turkey. So it makes sense for India to name its mission Operation Dost. It also sends a message, opens up possibilities of friendship or no animosity at the very least. The Turks have taken note. Let me tell you what their ambassador to India said. Dost is a common word in Turkish and Hindi. We have a Turkish proverb, Dost kara gunde beli olur. I hope I've got this right. A friend in need is a friend indeed. Thank you very much, India. Operation Dost kicked off almost immediately after the quakes. India became one of the first responders, and it has struck all the right notes since. For India, the crisis represents an opportunity to improve ties with Turkey, to make it realize what a partnership with India can look like. Turkey has historically sided with Pakistan, at least in the recent history. It has backed Pakistan's line on Kashmir. At the same time, it has continued to engage with India. I have some data with me. In 2000, the year 2000, bilateral trade between India and Turkey stood at around $505 million. By 2018, it had soared to $8.7 billion. By 2022, it had crossed the $10 billion mark. Compare this with Turkey and Pakistan's trade volume. In 2010, trade between the two countries was close to $1 billion. 12 years later, it has barely increased. Last year, it stood at $1.1 billion. In the past, India and Turkey had a steady relationship. It went downhill with Ankara's shifting priorities and the soaring ambition of its president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He's been the leader for almost 2 decades now, former football player turned mayor of Istanbul, then prime minister and now president. In his initial years in office, Erdogan was keen to join the European Union. He wanted his country to be seen as a regional power, a secular Muslim country, which was also a democracy. But somewhere along the way, he began to harbor dreams of leading the Islamic world, reviving the glory of the Ottoman Empire. He aligned himself with the likes of Malaysia and Pakistan, challenging the de facto leadership of the Arabs. It did not go as planned. But in the process, Erdogan began taking a harder line on Kashmir. He went out of his way to support Pakistan and speak against India. In 2020, Erdogan said, and I'm quoting, India right now has become a country where massacres are widespread. What massacres? Massacres of Muslims. By who? Hindus. Why did he say this? Not because he cared about Muslims, because if he did, he wouldn't be deporting Uyghur Muslims to China to face persecution. This was not about Muslims. This was about Erdogan's own positioning. He wanted to project himself as the leader of the Muslim world, and India was a convenient target. Erdogan was desperate to show he can lead the Muslim Ummah better than Saudi Arabia does. The plans backfired. He faced the ire of the Arabs and lost the friendship of India. Now India is trying to fix this. What's in it for New Delhi? India hopes that its outreach will improve the general atmosphere of ties between the two countries. New Delhi is keen to take on a bigger role in the world, one that comes with a lot of added responsibility. India holds the G20 presidency, and it's taking that role very seriously. India is also the chair of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization this year, the SCO, a group that Turkey is quite keen to join. A lot will depend on whether Ankara changes its stance towards New Delhi. India is consciously reaching out to them, but will Erdogan dramatically alter his foreign policy towards India anytime soon? It's a long shot, but definitely worth a try. India has extended its hand of dosti. Only time will tell if Turkey accepts it. And now it's time to keep up with the Kims. I'm talking about the Kims of North Korea. Kim Jong-un has no intention of giving up his nuclear arsenal. Lately, he's been making it a point to remind the world about this. How? 2 things. A showcase of said arsenal and a clear succession plan. North Korea's military strength had its biggest display yet. It happened at the nighttime military parade on Wednesday. He showcased a dozen intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs. But it wasn't just the monster missiles that he showed off. It was also his daughter, almost as an insurance, a warning against any move to topple his regime. South Korea is scared, though in a veiled fashion. Experts say China should be worried too. And in theory, so should the US. Why? Do they plan to respond to North Korea? And what role does Kim's daughter play here? Our next report tells you all about it.
North Korea has been making headlines again. Its nuclear attack capability was on its biggest display yet. We're talking about this military parade, a widely anticipated event. It marked the founding anniversary of the North Korean army. Why is it making headlines? Because of two things: ICBMs and the possibility of a clear succession plan. What are ICBMs? Intercontinental ballistic missiles. A dozen of them were on display. Last year, North Korea tested more missiles than any time in its history. And that's not all. Recently, Kim Jong-un made an announcement. He called for an exponential increase in the country's nuclear arsenal. He demanded complete war preparedness. Why? As a response to supposed threats from South Korea and the US. And these long-range ICBMs are quite the response. That too, less than 2 months after the announcement. This response has triggered fear. This nuclear arsenal could potentially overwhelm American nuclear defenses. So the US had its own response to the parade. It conducted high-profile joint military drills, that too with the North's undoubted enemy, South Korea. Tensions are likely to rise further. The US-South Korea annual military exercise is on the cards. It will be held on an expanded scale next month. It won't help matters. A minor incident between the neighbors could lead to a clash. Experts say China could also get involved. So it may have more to do to restrain North Korea in 2023. But coming back to the parade, there was something unusual as Kim took his usual parade position on the balcony. Pyongyang's monster missiles weren't the only thing on display. Kim Jong-un's daughter was part of the show too. Kim Joo-ae joined her father for the parade. She's thought to be his second oldest child, around 10 years of age. This is her 5th public appearance in less than 3 months. And in this short span, she has undergone remarkable transformation. So much so that many wonder, has she been chosen as the future leader of North Korea? Just look at the pictures. They seem shocking. She takes center stage in each picture, sitting between her mother and father, surrounded by military officials. But as jarring as this is, maybe it's a strategy to slowly initiate her. Maybe this strategy is already working. The language used to address her has changed. Earlier, state media referred to her as beloved daughter. Now, she's being addressed as respected daughter. It's an adjective reserved only for the most revered. It's not unexpected that Kim will want to pass the mantle down to his daughter. But one thing is raising eyebrows. Why has her initiation sped up? Kim Jong-un is only 39. His daughter is a child. There's a lot of speculation. Maybe his health is not in the best shape? Maybe he's trying to give his daughter a good start? He was only publicly declared as the next leader a year before his father died. That gave him a rocky start. Maybe he's trying to overcome the prejudices of a deeply patriarchal society. North Korea has never been led by a woman. Installing a woman at the top will require a lot of work. But at the end of the day, more than being a male-dominated state, it's Kim-dominated. And it's believed that Kim is using her to send a message, both to Pyongyang and to the world. He has no intentions of giving up the top spot to someone from outside the family. He has no intentions of giving up his nuclear arsenal. And he may be trying to create an insurance, one that will help against any attempts to topple his regime.
South Africa has declared a state of national disaster, the second one in 2 years. The first was because of the pandemic, and now it's because the country has plunged into darkness. South Africa is facing the worst energy crisis in decades. President Cyril Ramaphosa says he'll appoint an electricity minister soon. But this crisis has to do with more than power. It's a story of how rampant corruption and looting can cripple a country. Here's a report. This is what South Africa looks like now. It has plunged into an unprecedented energy crisis. Millions of homes are without electricity. Businesses are struggling to stay afloat. Power cuts have become a daily affair, lasting for more than 10 hours. And there seems to be no respite in sight. All eyes were on the South African Parliament on Friday. It saw dramatic scenes of opposition parties protesting, barging onto the stage before being driven out. Then President Cyril Ramaphosa delivered his State of the Nation address. And the state wasn't the best.
The National Disaster Management Center has consequently classified the energy crisis and its impact as a disaster. We are therefore declaring a national state of disaster to respond to the electricity crisis and its effects.
The state of the disaster is the latest measure by the government to control the electricity crisis. And this isn't the first time. It was first used during the COVID lockdown in 2020, then during the deadly floods last year that saw more than 40,000 people being displaced. The government says the emergency provision will help them buy time.
It will enable us to provide practical measures that we need to take to support businesses, a number of businesses, for instance, in food production, storage, retail supply chains, including for the rollout of generators and solar panels, and uninterrupted power supply.
Africa's most industrialized nation is paying a heavy price for this. Its economic growth is expected to fall to just 0.3% this year, compared to 2.5% last year. Almost half of South Africa is unemployed. It is battling an external debt of $130 billion. A power crisis is the last thing that South Africa needs. And it's been brewing for a while. Power cuts have been a daily affair in South Africa since 2007. When President Ramaphosa came to power in 2018, he promised to fix it. But his plans remain stuck in red tape. At the center of the storm is Eskom, a 100-year-old company and South Africa's struggling state power supplier. Eskom supplies around 80% of the nation's power. The company is riddled with corruption, decades of mismanagement, high debt, and aging infrastructure. It has changed 13 CEOs in 14 years. Its power stations are aging, their output as unreliable as the company's reputation. A judicial probe from last year revealed that Eskom had entered into irregular contracts for coal supply. The contracts were worth more than $800 million. They were given to entities close to former President Jacob Zuma. And this is reported to be just the tip of the iceberg. Reports suggest Eskom's coal supplies have been misused for far too long. So here's where the nation is at: a corrupt institution that is struggling to maintain basic infrastructure. It has grand plans to retire some of its older fleet in the next 7 years, but does it have alternatives in place? Not quite. In 2022, South Africa saw a record 205 days of rolling blackouts. The situation has not improved in 2023, and South Africans aren't too pleased. Citizens took to the streets last month. The opposition took on the government.
We want the ongoing blackouts to come to a complete end. We are not fighting or blaming anyone. We just want these blackouts to come to an end. In the townships we live in, criminals commit crimes during blackouts.
We really need government to come to a point where they sit down and discuss and use the relevant people to make the change within the issues that we are facing. Because in all honesty, it affects us so much financially, physically and emotionally.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says he will appoint a new electricity minister to tackle the crisis. The government says the situation will be resolved in 6 to 12 months, but Eskom says the power cuts could continue well into 2025. The people of South Africa can only hope to find light at the end of this dark tunnel. And now let's talk about work. You know, the thing you do in between living so that you can afford rent. How is the daily grind treating you? A majority of the world is back in office. The old routine of long hours and the added hassle of commuting has set in again. In fact, it's worse than before. And the old question is back. Can too much work kill you? The answer is yes. I know it's not an ideal subject for a Friday night, but it's a subject that must be discussed. Overwork can kill people. Overwork is killing people. This week, there was news from Thailand. A 44-year-old man had a heart attack at his desk. He worked at the Thai news network in Bangkok. Reports say he regularly worked overtime. Often, it was 7 days a week. He would regularly get home late at night after a grueling shift. Reports say he was called in even while on sick leave. After a point, his body couldn't take it. Now, to many of you, this may sound like a typical work week, especially if you're in Asia. This region is known for unforgiving long hours. Deaths due to overwork are so common, Japan even has a term for it. It's called karoshi, death by overwork. Yet despite all of this, overwork is seen as a virtue, often confused with hard work. You're supposed to be a team player and work for the good of the organization. Well, you should, but what about your own good? What is overwork doing to you? There are the obvious health repercussions. A desk job means sitting all day, increased risk of heart diseases and diabetes. Not to mention all your stiff joints and carpal tunnel syndromes. Then there's the constant stress. Stress releases chemicals in your body that lead to elevated blood pressure and cholesterol. And in this age of constant connectivity, that stress is just a call or a text away. You know that feeling of sheer horror when your boss calls? That's literally killing you. I have data, findings of a study from 2021 conducted by the World Health Organization. In 2016, close to 500 million people were exposed to risks of working long hours. More than 7,45,000 people died that year from overwork. Here's the data of the period between the year 2000 and 2016. Deaths because of heart disease due to overwork rose by 42%. Overwork causing strokes rose by 19%. People who work 55 hours or more every week, 55 hours or more, face a higher stroke risk, 35% more than for people who work between 35 to 40 hours. The risk of dying from heart disease is 17% higher for overworkers. If you don't want to bother with all the numbers, here's the gist of it. Overwork kills people. Now, you may say that this is how the world works, that most people don't or may not like their jobs, but they must put in long hours. Well, that's not really true, because this problem seems to be unique to the East. In the US, less than 5% of the population is exposed to overwork. Same in Brazil and Canada. Europeans have the lowest exposure to overwork health risks. The typical work week in the US is 37 hours. In the UK and Israel, 36 hours. What about India? 48 hours a week. That's the average on paper, not counting what you do above and beyond this. In China, it's 46 hours every week. That's the work week, 46 hours. There is no denying that Asia has been dealt a bad hand when it comes to work-life balance. So what can we in the East do? What can we do about this? Take breaks every now and then, walk around to get your blood flowing. Don't take work calls after your shift as much as possible, all that jazz. It sounds easier than done, honestly. If you're a team leader, you can ensure good work conditions. If you're a team member, ask for them, better hours, more balance. It won't be easy. Companies are always going to try and squeeze their workers, but it's always up to you to draw the line, always. And now it's time to wrap. Our world is an interesting place. There's so much to tell you every day. Some things don't really qualify as a headline, don't have enough for a full story, but they're interesting nonetheless. Like 78% of Indians in a survey fell for a love letter written by ChatGPT, thinking it was written by a human. 78% fell for it. AI is ready to take more roles than we imagined. Elon Musk's view count is declining. Guess what he did? He fired the top Twitter engineer. It is the thug life. Finally, Vantage shots, images that tell the story. The Indian Space Research Organization has launched a new rocket. It placed 3 satellites into orbit. The rocket was launched from the Satish Dhawan Space Center at Sriharikota. It is located in the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh. Meanwhile, SpaceX performed a key test on its new rocket system, Starship. In Hawaii, a surfing event just wrapped up. The World Surf League. You don't want to miss the images. And there are wildfires in Chile. More than 20 people have died, thousands injured. The flames destroyed 300,000 hectares of land. The president has sought help from others. And a video of a family trying to escape the flames has come to light. We'll bring you all of this, leaving you with these images, in fact. Thank you for watching. Have a good weekend.
1, 0. Beautiful launch of SSLV D2 US 07 on a bright sunny morning.
प्रज्वलन और सफलतापूर्ण उत्थापन SSLV D2 ब्रह्मोचकियान का अपनी उद्दिष्ट कक्षा की ओर SSLV D2 US 7 मिशन.
We have confirmation from the Range Operations Director.
One satellite separated. SSLV D2 US 07 mission has been fully accomplished.
Ya, ábreme aquí, ábreme aquí. ¡Yo Carlos! ¡Súbete! ¡Vamos, weón! ¡Súbete, súbete! ¡Vamos, mira.
Thank you.